Okay, welcome Aesthetic Society members. My name is Max Baybak. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer over here at Influx Marketing, and I'm joined today by Mr. Adam Daniels, my business partner and our CEO. Hi,
Hey
Adam.
everyone. Hey there.
We are based in Pasadena, California, and also in Salt Lake City, where Adam is, or more properly, he is in Park City. But I guess we're kind of based everywhere these days. With remote work and so forth, but we still have offices in both Pasadena and in Salt Lake. And today we put together a little presentation called Google or Facebook: How Smart Practices Are Capitalizing on the surging demand for aesthetics. Just to kind of, we get asked a lot of questions by our clients and just by medical professionals in general, and especially in aesthetics. They're seeing this surge and they want to know what they really should be doing. So we broke it down into this presentation here for you. And, when we talk about Google or Facebook, and we'll get into this, we mean more than just the advertising side of it. There's obviously more to digital advertising than just those two platforms, but those are, clearly the two behemoths. And there's a paid advertising strategy side and an organic, what we would refer to as an organic strategy side of both of those platforms. We're going to kind of break those down and just look at how you should be leveraging or exploiting the different features and the different channels and avenues, or sort of sub channels within each of those platforms, if that makes sense. So the first thing here, I don't think it's really a secret for anyone. We're seeing surging demand for aesthetics. I know that when we first came into the shutdown in early March, no one knew what to expect. Adam and I were on many a phone call going, trying to make a plan B, C, D for whatever came. And we would be lying if we said we expected this. It sort of, I think, surprised us all. And we've seen many of our practices that we work with across the country. So we primarily deal with aesthetic practices, and we've seen many of our practices having some of their best months ever, if not their actual top best months. Would you agree with that, Adam, from the clients that you're speaking with?
Absolutely. I mean, I've spoken to clients from all different parts of the country. There's a few where they haven't maybe enjoyed as much success as others, but in the majority, a lot of them have expressed to me that they've had, in the months of, say, coming out of June and then into July, their best months ever, and that's in some cases like in 20 years of practice, some of the best months. So it's surprising how much surge in demand there is. And like you said, uh, definitely not something that, when we were looking at kind of the world we were walking into in March and April, that we expected as a part of this. However, I think it's a testament to kind of some of the strengths of the industry and the direction that it's going long term. So we can go into that more, but yeah, I would
Yeah,
agree.
solid point, and that's where we're going to go a bit into on this presentation. But I've been getting some of the same feedback, um, just in terms of the highest ever months. And kind of another thing we'll go into in this presentation is the fact that there's the saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that's been largely true, but it doesn't mean that it's equally distributed. And so there are things that you as a practice need to do, that your marketing agency or your internal marketing teams, however you're set up with marketing, need to be doing to scoop up a larger amount of that pie. So it's not a given that just because things are surging, everyone is going to be feeling it the same. So we're going to go into that. So there's a lot of reasons why people are talking about why this huge uptick in demand. You've no doubt heard the term Zoom gloom, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. There's also some data that we have that would show more than just like Adam said, there's a larger kind of macro trend occurring here that's been solidified and accelerated with COVID, and that's what we see across the landscape with COVID, is that trends that are already well underway are accelerating, whether that's certain things dying out, certain trends kind of at their tail, and certain ones really coming into the forefront. And my experience has been that COVID has solidified both of those in both directions. So yes, it's Zoom gloom, but there's a larger macro trend here that is just being solidified by pushing everyone online. And then there's other factors. So spouses are working from home, recovery is easier. I have anecdotal stories from people in my own life, family members who are thinking, they've been thinking about this for a long time, and now they're really researching it and getting serious about it, because it's really, they don't have to think about how am I going to take off all this time from work and be at home recovering or whatever it might be. Spouse can watch children, things like that. And then also people are factually spending less is what the data shows. And so they're a little more willing and ready to freely spend on these things that they've been considering for a long time. So there's a number of, just to kind of, no doubt all of you have seen all these articles and you're experiencing this yourself, but there's a number of just kind of a wave of media talking about this phenomenon. Here is a CBS Philly affiliate, unbelievable phenomenon, coronavirus pandemic causing plastic surgery boom. That's in August. Fox News, Zoom users flock to cosmetic surgeons amid COVID-19 pandemic. The New York Times, don't like what you see on Zoom, get a facelift and join the crowd. The Dallas Morning News, Botox boom, COVID stay-at-home lifestyle and masks create ideal time for secret plastic surgery is what it says. I'm not sure why it has to be secret. I think in many places, as long as you're using your own, Quad A, SF surgery center and so forth, I think that's totally fine. The Zoom boom, how close-up conference calls are fueling a rise in plastic surgery. Refinery 29, masks are making us eye obsessed and cosmetic surgeries are on the rise. It goes on. And it's interesting, there's a lot of talk about Botox, non-surgicals and so forth. I'm sure you've heard that, but there's also, here's a Toronto.com, nose jobs, facelifts, and Botox, but nose jobs and facelifts, demand for plastic surgery and cosmetic procedures soars during COVID-19. So I happened to have the opportunity to have a conversation just yesterday with the CEO of Real Self, where he shared some facts and figures with us, which was really interesting, from the data that they see. And he and his team are, I think, in a unique position to see some interesting information. One of the things he mentioned was rhinoplasty at near double. I'm actually pulling this up right here because he said rhinoplasty and breast augmentation, they're seeing double traffic on those things than before. So that's pretty interesting. So we talked about these macro tailwinds that are just really being solidified or accelerated by COVID, that are fueling the overall growth in the sector. Again, I'm sure none of these are entirely new, but from what we're seeing, just to kind of recap it, there's a increased public acceptance. Yes, there is that Kardashian effect, but I think there's also a huge, we absolutely see this with our practices across the country where they service different demographics, and there's very different outlooks on aesthetic procedures in different parts of the country, from the East Coast to the South to out here on the West Coast to the Midwest. It's very different, and there's a huge degree of growth in just very normal everyday people who want to be, don't want to look extremely different. They want to look like themselves. They want to look normal, but they're very open to some natural, appropriate cosmetic enhancement. So that's a major factor, is the increased public acceptance. There's broadening demographics, whether that's men, a younger generation that's kind of getting to the pre-juvenation phase. And then there's also a lot more consumer education, and there's industry spending and the consumer, and there's a lot more platforms where people can understand their options, and we're seeing much more informed patients. And there can be challenges with that, where it's a double-edged sword, where a patient knows just enough to be a little bit troublesome in some cases, but nonetheless, they are much more educated. And there's all kinds of non-surgical innovation happening, as we know, and those things are driving more growth for practices who are embracing that. And what we see is there's still more room for growth. Going back again to that conversation that I mentioned with the CEO of Real Self, he mentioned that in their recent surveys, despite this idea that there's all this public acceptance, and despite, which I just mentioned, and despite how everyone kind of seems to flaunt it on Instagram and everything, and it's almost kind of a badge of honor to get any kind of cosmetic enhancement. What his data shows is that still 1% of people. Hi there.
Oh, okay. Lovely.
Hi, thank you for joining us. We were just in the middle here, and we're gonna keep rolling, and hope you enjoy the presentation. But what we were just discussing was so on Yeah. So in this survey with CEO of Real Self, the information that he shared with me was that still 51% of people felt there was still some sort of stigma around the subject of plastic surgery or aesthetic enhancement. And to us, we see that as a good thing. And here's why. Clearly, there is a larger wave of acceptance publicly, but the fact that still more than half, technically, of society is still not quite there just means there's so much more room for growth. And as the younger generation, as they are right now, kind of ages into power, that's going to, I think, we're going to see certain aspects of cosmetic enhancement become just part of everyday life for a larger majority of the population. So there's just a lot more room for the pie to grow rather than just fighting for market share. So those are kind of the macro tailwinds that we're talking about. And to us, the V-shaped recovery that we saw kind of coming out of April, May, after the initial shutdown, and the quick bounce back in the sector really just highlights the fundamental strength of the industry. And again, I don't mean to keep going back to this conversation, but it was really interesting talking with Tom Siri of Real Self, how those things correlated, his data correlated. It's not that I had the exact same data. I obviously don't have access to we don't have access to the same information that he has, but we're seeing a lot of things. Some of what we see is anecdotal. Some of it is more formalized. He has some formalized survey information. And when it just lined up in an interesting way. So he was saying, it's not just Zoom. I think he even said it's not Zoom. There's a lot of other reasons. It's the recovery. It's the financials that we mentioned earlier. So he agreed on that. And really what we think is that there's just fundamental strength. And I think there's factors of people wanting to get out, feel better. There's a mental health aspect of wanting to kind of get out and socialize again and feel and look your best, which has definitely been a factor. Zoom plays into that. But these following graphs that we pulled here kind of highlight the steady long-term growth that we're seeing and the short-term resilience that the industry's had. So we just went ahead and looked at Google Trends just to kind of get a big picture. We can look in at specific keywords at any given time, and we do that every single day for our clients to understand search demand trends. But in this case, Google Trends is kind of a nice way to look big picture at just kind of how people are really, what's the general public sentiment and interest and demand and popularity of a topic. So this is the term plastic surgeon. And this, we're looking over on a 5-year trend. Now, my understanding is Google will also semantically lump in some other things. So it's not just people who type in just the word plastic surgeon, but it's just interest around this topic. Not just specifically and only the words plastic and surgeon entered into a search engine or into Google. Across the top of this graph at 100 represents peak popularity. And you can see we have obviously a huge dip right here in late March, a V shape right back up into mid-July where we have at all-time highs, where interest in that term is at all-time highs. And we pulled a bunch of these. I'm going to go through them quick, simply just to kind of illustrate that this is not like a cherry-picked one-off outlier. Another term, plastic surgeon near me. This would indicate more intent for someone actually looking. And again, V-shape here in the beginning of the lockdown, and then now at levels above where it was prior. There's one anomaly a while back, and we're basically almost there. So this is like really interesting to me. Here we are, we're trending up, V-shape, and then even higher than prior. So again, we mentioned there was that article and there was the conversation with the CEO of Real Self saying rhinoplasty interest is doubling. This is all-time highs or 5-year highs, I should say, per Google Trends. Yes, the V-shape, but it didn't even dip nearly as much as some of these other things. And then it's not regaining its high, it's hitting a brand new 5-year high, which is fascinating.
Impressive.
Yeah. This term is breast surgery. Some of the other terms are, people search in different ways. So kind of categorizing this all under the term breast surgery. Obviously that's going to embrace a lot of different things. However, interesting to see definite V shape, definite all-time peak interest immediately afterward. Come back down a little bit, but still higher than where we were before, higher or just about where we were before COVID. Another one reaching V shape and then all-time highs, and then higher again, the exact same shape, higher than before COVID, tummy tuck. So that's really interesting. Another one following the same trend, blepharoplasty, 5 years, big V shape, right back. So what I think is actually interesting about this one, Adam, I don't know if I showed you this actually. We talked about a bunch of these, but this one specifically, we're at an all-time high right before COVID. You see this trend up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're getting at here, where we're saying there was already this trend, and you're going to keep seeing it on some of these other graphs where you see that all of a sudden we hit an all-time high right before, and then down, and then back to that all-time high. I just pulled this because I thought it was interesting. This is basically since the beginning of Google keeping this data. It's as old as you can go. It's a 16-year trend back to 2004. And it's just interesting to see something like eyelid surgery just going up, 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 up. And I use the term eyelid surgery because that is, especially back in the day before consumers were more educated on the terminology, they were using a term like that. And then I just also, when I looked at this on the long-term trend, it really distinctly showed that V. And that's part of the reason why I pulled it here in this long trend. But it's so distinct, and then it just comes right back. I mean, they don't call it a V-shaped recovery for nothing, because there it is, and we're right in the same range. Just interesting to see it over a long period of time. Another one, V-shape, and now higher than prior, higher than before COVID, pre-COVID, is liposuction. This is also on an all-time, oh no, I apologize, this is a 5-year trend. I have that mislabeled there at the bottom, but you see here it's 5 years. Brow lift. So, okay, so this is another one that kind of highlights what I was referring to with look at this peak in interest right before COVID. That's all-time high right before COVID. Or again, I'm only going to 5 years, but when I look further back on these, there's not highs prior to 5 years ago. That are
they're all trending upwards. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So when I say all-time high, I guess I'd have to make sure I'm looking at the 16-year graph on each of these, but for the most part, this is the highs are within the last 5 years. And in this case, it's right in the beginning of March of 2020. So that's really fascinating to me to look at. Here's another one. There's this one very strange anomaly way back in, looks like 2017 on facelift that sort of messes with the scale of this graph. But again, you see this trending up. And then the interesting thing is this huge peak here right after COVID. Kind of a big spike, I should say, on facelift. So this is happening in surgery. It's also, I think, what the media is even more talking about is it's happening in non-surgical. And you can see this dramatic, this is the keyword med spa. You see nice long-term uptrend, and then a big plummet here in March, and then boom, right back at it. This one to me is one of the more impressive. It's just so interesting. Adam, I could look at this line right here and I'm like, yep, that's the week when no one knew no one knew anything was going to happen. It was just total
uncertainty.
Total uncertainty. And it's really interesting to look at this to look at all of these things like a financial, almost, using the same models and logic as you would be looking at any kind of a stock or market or financial sector. There's a big drop, a whole lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And then all of a sudden confidence resumes and we're back at it. So I think we've seen that across all sectors, outside of aesthetics, except for those that didn't have the fundamental strength or really didn't have the fundamental health as a sector, haven't made it back. So this just highlights that strength and resilience. And then I have a bunch more. Medical spa, just looking at that keyword to see, because some people do search it that way. And here we are. Again, all-time high the all-time high on that term is after COVID. That's the top of that graph. Again, 100 on this graph just equals peak popularity. They don't give us the actual number. It's all relative based off that high point. Med spa near me, all-time high right after COVID. Botox, kind of a weird anomalous spike early in 2020, and then this swoosh V and right back at it. And, you know, our data that we're seeing from speaking to our practices and other things we're looking at, it indicates like Botox sales are at all-time highs. And that's, again, what the media is talking about largely. But anyway, it's illustrated here really nicely. Again, that V shape. This is just on a larger trend. I again, backing it out to 16 years is kind of interesting. One or two anomalous spikes here. But then, so Adam, this is what I'm talking about here. We hit all-time highs just before COVID, and we're almost back to them. But again, that reinforces the point that we were on a certain trend.
Yeah.
And then we just got right back to it. Less than it was about, you know, COVID.
Yeah, it's incredible when you look at something like that, and then you also realize that, you know, more than half of the population, at least based on other surveys, is still essentially still in a growth place as an audience. So this can just keep going anyway.
Yeah, and you could make the argument that they're not going to be converted, and there's a percentage of them that won't, but the trend would show that people are coming around, you know? So in terms of finding it more normal, and as it's human nature that as your friends do things, you go, oh, well, maybe I should try it out. And so who should I go to? And we're seeing that everywhere. So I think that 51% that's still not comfortable with it yet is some percentage of that. I haven't done the whole addressable market research on that, but to determine what's the real bottom up addressable market, but there's a huge percentage of growth that population represents.
Yeah.
Just a Botox competitor, again, all-time high, Dysport, just before COVID, huge V and a huge recovery. Hasn't actually come back to that all-time high, but I think the main point here is it's higher than the trend was prior now, or it's right back on trend, I would say, to that before that all-time high spike. And again, the main point being here, we have this peak in interest right before. Maybe this was all people who knew that there was going to be a shutdown and wanted to get their toxin in right before. Somehow, I don't think so. Another one, Juvederm, huge V shape, back in range, big spike before. This is Juvederm on a 20-year trend or the 16-year trend. Again, interesting to me to see just straight moving up and then
Highest ever.
V and then the highest ever, yeah.
Yeah.
The all-time highest. This just also highlights the trend. One really weird anomalous spike back in 2018, but lip filler uptrending steadily for 16 years. Nice swoosh shape, now at all-time highs very clearly, and not slipping back down for several months. So that to me is a really interesting graph, actually. And there's other things, body contouring, V shape. The dotted lines here mean that they don't have enough data yet, but it looks like it's trending back up in the next period for this. That's what that means. But again, the V shape is the key. Body sculpting, all-time high spike right after the shutdown. So the bottom line is that the trend is super clear, and the question really is, how should you ride that wave? We put in this, this is my fault, so I apologize, Adam, before I hand it over to you here. I put in this very cheesy line. What's the best board to ride this wave with? Like I said at the beginning of this, our clients and other practices will ask us, what should I really be doing to maximize this surge and to scoop up the most market share that I can? And so, again, we just decided to break it down in terms of Facebook, and Google. And of course, within Facebook, we mean Instagram as well, for anyone that wasn't clear for. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Adam.
Yeah, so this is a question that we get asked a ton, as Max was just saying. And I think that the answer is that each practice needs to look at what is right for them. But the answer is both Google and Facebook, both are an approach that should be considered. So how to reach these people? Obviously, like he was just showing through all those search metrics, there's no shortage of demand, and there's no shortage of, it's higher than it's ever been in the history that we've been doing this. So how do we reach these people who are searching? So paid and organic. We've kind of broken this down so you can see in a relatively simple way On the paid side with Google, you have obviously search ads, you have the display network, you have YouTube ads, you have shopping ads. That's a paid way of reaching an audience. And then when it comes to organic, you have search engine optimization using YouTube, meaning from organic discovery of people finding things. Local GMB, which stands for Google My Business, which is how you get on Google Maps and how you're found on a search engine results page. All of that's through organic action as opposed to paid. And then on the Facebook side, you obviously have Facebook ads, you have Instagram ads, you have Audience Network, which is another network of places that Facebook has established that they can show ads to people that are not necessarily on Facebook or Instagram. And then organically, you have Instagram, as in you have your own profile account, you post things regularly, you have organic engagement with those actions, you grow your audience. As I'm sure you guys all know, there's a number of people in the aesthetic space who, some of them have large followings. They've managed to build up a large organic Instagram following, and that generates, in those cases, for those people who have really dedicated the time to be content creators, a number of patients for them. Again, it's a long game, and we'll go into this a little bit more, but the difference between the organic and the paid is paid, you can just, as long as you have good creative and you have a well-managed campaign, you can flip a switch and it should generate leads for you, qualified leads. Whereas the organic approach, equally as valuable, is just a longer game. And like Max alluded to earlier, we kind of look at everything from almost as if it's from an investment view where, what are you putting your energy into and what's the return going to be? And
horizons, you strategically look at, if you're doing an investment, you're going to look at, okay, I have this much to invest, and I'm looking at this kind of a time horizon. I have this kind of risk tolerance. I'm this old. My earning potential is this much. My practice is at this phase. So, marketing really, if you take that view towards it, it's really helpful. And a lot of what we're going to show you here kind of is under that same sort of methodology.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like he was just saying, if a person's in the early part of their career, mid part of their career, or they're on the back nine of their career, you're going to have a different approach to how you're investing in this strategy. We try to tailor that approach to everyone that we work with. So search versus display. So search is in, a person goes on a search engine, whether it's Google or other ones that are out there. In this case, Google is clearly, they own more than 80% of the market on that. They're going and they're looking for an exact thing. So they're targeting an exact current interest. It's an active action versus a passive action, whereas display is more passive. Transitional versus fixed. I don't know if you want to talk about transitional versus fixed, Max.
Yeah. So when what we have listed on here on this slide, active versus passive, transitional versus fixed, these are terms we use for the types of audiences that you can target with a platform. And it's helpful to just think about audiences in these ways, an active audience or a passive audience. So we think of Google search, as Adam said, as an active audience where they're actually, taking the time to go out of their way to put in a keyword, to research something, versus, so that's Google, versus they're sitting on Facebook or Instagram, scrolling, catching up on family and friends and what they're all doing. And then they see something, go, maybe you could grab their attention. And there definitely are great strategies for doing it, but that's just inherently, those are the differences. And very similarly, transitional versus fixed, similar but different. So a transitional audience is really refers to someone, or a person who has some sort of life event or period of time in which they're in a market for something and then they go out of it. A really great simple example is like someone moving. They're going to need certain services during that period of time, and then after that they're never going to think about it again until they move again. And there are much easier ways to target transitional audiences with Google. There are definitely ways to do it on Facebook, but there are limitations to that. So an easy example, just really dumbing it down, is if you type in moving company on Google, that person who's typing that in is probably looking for a moving company, probably moving, and they're transitional. And every week you just have new people rolling through that audience. It's turning over. So that's the key thing to understand. That's why we talk about fixed as the opposite side of transitional, because if you're talking about jump over to Facebook and you're talking about a person who has a certain interest in, there are people that go in and out of different buying cycles on Facebook, and their algorithm is really good at spotting that. But it's better for spotting that at e-commerce than it is for aesthetics or anything medical, for a lot of reasons, which we could unpack. But typically you're taking someone with an interest, you're saying interest in beauty products, let's just say. And theoretically, that's fixed. there aren't that many people being added to that audience every week, unless there's, it's just depending on, there might be a small amount of people who are, based on age, showing interest in new products, and Facebook tags them as someone who's interested, but it's not rolling over the same way. And there's a lot there. It's really important to understand that, because then you can understand how your creative needs to, your ad creative and your campaigns need to be adjusted based on that, which we can unpack further. But that's the key thing to know about it. Sorry, that's probably more of a mouthful than you were looking for, Adam, but there you go.
No, but that's good. That helps to explain it. And so obviously with Google search, when you have higher intent, meaning there's more value, the person searching, like one of the examples that was given above, plastic surgeon near me, or breast augmentation surgeon, as opposed to just breast augmentation. They're not just researching the surgery itself, they're researching someone who can give it to them in their local area, or who's the best plastic surgeon near me, or something like this. That higher intent is going to bring higher cost, because they're further down what we call, the funnel, so to speak. They're closer to making a decision of finding a person, rather than just being closer to the beginning where they're kind of learning about something or maybe becoming lightly interested in it. So with search, it's higher cost. And then conversely, passively discovering things. I'm sure all of you guys have been looking through Facebook or looking through Instagram, and you're looking at whatever your interests are: camping, hiking, vacations, your family. And then based on that, you get served something that maybe is slightly related, but a little different, and you find that interesting. That's a passive discovery of something that you have now find you have an interest in, or it piqued your interest. And so there's lower intent associated with those type of ads. So, I mean, essentially the answer is both of these platforms or both of these systems have their uses, and they both should be used in a tailored approach for every practice. Just understanding the differences and making sure expectations are set is super essential, though, in order to make sure that you don't have a wrong expectation of what you're going to get out of it. So lower intent with display, it's target-based or content-based interests, lookalike audiences, meaning we know that you have certain similarities to this other audience that likes something. And so the algorithm of Facebook will decide, or Instagram will decide, to show you certain ads. That's how you end up getting shown those things. You have a lower intent where you might click on something, kind of interested. There will be, you'll convert or you'll submit your information, but the likelihood of converting into a surgery is going to take a little more effort in order to get that person actually further educated and further brought in and controlled in order to be turned into an actual patient. So in the case of search, Facebook obviously doesn't have any search ad product, but in the case of display, they have superior interest targeting, granular demographic data, their lookalike systems and their algorithm. That's why Facebook has become a multi-billion-dollar company, is because their ad technology. I'm sure you've all experienced being served something where it's like you were just talking about it, or it's almost like wild how close to something that you were just thinking of or talking about, now you're getting served it on Instagram or Facebook. That's because they have a really good ad system. So
yeah, it sounds like we're saying, when we talk about higher intent with Google, it sounds like we're saying it's better but the truth is it's just better for certain things. And there are certain things that Facebook is much better at. The granular demographic data, the algorithms for just the targeting and interest information is incredible and can be far superior. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way on this. I apologize. Far superior to Google. And then the other thing to mention is, just so no one has any confusion on this, a lot of people do talk about the search engine aspect of, there's a search capability within Instagram. And I've heard a few people say like, oh, I go on Instagram to search for things. And I think that's becoming a little bit of a trend. I don't think it's huge yet from what we're seeing. But they don't actually have an ad product that will show you results based on when you type a search into either Facebook or Instagram. And again, every time we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Facebook and Instagram. As marketers, that's one bucket for us. I know that's kind of interesting, but if you haven't purchased ads through Facebook, it's key to know that the back end in which you're putting in your ad orders is all one for both Facebook and Instagram. And then you can specify where you want it to show, but we look at Facebook as that umbrella. So I just wanted to mention that. And then the other benefit is you do get a lower cost, typically speaking. The cost per lead, or whatever your goal is, in our case, it's always a lead. The cost per lead is definitely lower on Facebook. So The trade-off becomes there's a lower intent but a lower cost and a higher ability to target certain things. So we'll get into when those benefits of Facebook are to your advantage and when they're not.
All right, so this is comparing costs. This is pretty interesting. So 2020 year to date, obviously it's been a very weird year, but it's breaking down Google, and what's FBIG just means Facebook, Instagram. It's what we describe as that whole platform. So the average CPC, which is the cost per click in the case of Google, $2.81 this year so far. For Facebook, Instagram, $2.67. The average cost per acquisition, which just goes back to what we were just talking about, acquisition as in it's generating a lead, whether it's a phone call or a lead form, $57.74. For Google, which is more expensive, as we just mentioned, than the cost per acquiring on Facebook. However, the intent is higher. And then in the case of Facebook, Instagram, $37.40. That's the average across the whole year so far to date. So that gives you an idea where, of course we get down into crunching these numbers, but let's say for every lead generated, maybe, 1 out of 4 or some ratio there converts into an actual surgery. And then from there, you can do the cost of what it's taking you to acquire an actual patient.
That would be to calculate your actual ROAS or return on ad spend. But I think the interesting point on this slide, Adam, as you and I were discussing just before we went live, is that these are much closer together than they normally are.
Right.
So this is where this information, and like you started at the beginning, 2020 is a wild year. So normally you get, and so we titled this presentation, How Smart Practices Are Leveraging the surge in demand for aesthetics. And this is one of the opportunities we're seeing, that there's an opportunity right now to purchase higher intent, which we just went over. Google leads higher intent for a cost much lower and closer to what you're seeing on Facebook and Instagram. Not much lower than normal Google ads and closer to Facebook acquisition costs. What we've been seeing is a lot of people flocking to Facebook and Instagram, with so many people going on the internet, and then a lot of people flocking to those advertisers, flocking to that platform, which is bringing costs up a bit. And we've seen people pulling back. We've advised in the case of our clients, whenever they are, it's personal and they need to make their own financial decisions. But if they have the budget and they said, yeah, we have the budget, what do you want us to do? We say, let's keep spending. And we're getting returns that are a little bit more outsized than normal on Google. So this graph to me is really fascinating. The fact that our cost per clicks are similar. Usually Facebook would be cheaper. Usually Google would be a little higher. This is a basket of keywords, so it is really keyword specific.
Yeah.
Whereas on Facebook, it's just how many people are competing for that fixed audience. So again, more people are competing for that audience. It's going up. And with Google, the average is coming down. And it's really interesting to note on this. And there's some more slides here that'll highlight this a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is a breakdown by month where you can see exactly to what Max was just discussing. January, February of this year, average CPA for Google. So the average cost to acquire a patient, rather than being in the 50s, was $109 or $112. And then you can see it just fall off a cliff, where March and April and into May it goes down to $36. And then similarly, the cost per click would go along with that, where rather than paying $3 to $4 a click, you're down to $1.45, $1.50 a click. So it drops by almost a third, or to a third of what it was. That is people pulling their ad spends. And so this is one of the opportunities we discussed actually at the overall ASAP's virtual meeting, where we discussed spending money on Google ads right now was quite an opportunity, because you can reach an audience that was there. Of course, there was periods there where search dropped, as we covered, but also, it's kind of like investing. You try to catch the low point, where if you can start entering into that market and really investing in that area, you can start snatching up market share in your market very fast by getting a cheaper amount of ads to reach the right audience that you want. And then you can see, while it does come back up a little bit, it's still, half of what it was in January or February of this year. And then again, the average, that's what it comes down to, $2.81, your average for cost per click, and $57 across that whole year so far. And this is an example of a couple of campaign-specific information, which I don't know, Max, if you want to discuss this specifically.
Yeah, well, just like the search trend data we were showing, by the way, one key thing to point out as we're talking about the difference between the platforms, Facebook and Google, all those Google trend things we were showing is based off Google data, which is based off of their users, Google users searching. So the ability to capture that search demand, there's no better place to do that than Google itself, where people are searching, just by the way. So then again, that highlights why we find Google to be really a fantastic platform for capturing that high intent search. But coming back to this slide, consistent with those trends where it showed that interest in breast campaigns was at all-time highs, or actually it was just higher, but rhino all-time highs, rhinoplasty related keywords. And here we have just an aggregate of data across breast related campaigns and rhinoplasty related campaigns being a little higher than the average. So there is competition. There are more competitive segments within, and it's just an interesting anecdotal thing to point out here. We got about $84 CPA on a breast augmentation campaign, $78 on rhinoplasty. That's for an actual interested lead from Google, which is, we don't have an exact sort of multiplier on a Google lead over a Facebook lead, but I would say it's many times over higher intent. So I just think that slide is interesting to point out, just breaking down what's inside of those Google numbers.
Yeah. All right, so this covers sort of the it's just an overall index where you guys can see it kind of follows. Google is the blue line, Google cost per acquisition, and Facebook cost per acquisition is the red line, where you can see January, Google was significantly higher, and this just sort of graphs it where you can see now it's starting to come back up just a little bit, but it's nowhere close to where it was in the beginning of this year. It's still quite an opportunity, I would say, to really invest properly. It's what we're advising a lot of our clients to do, and a lot of them are seeing the gains of that right now, where they're having huge months on their surgical side of their practice, and also non-surgical as well. And then in the case of the red line here, you can see where it kind of peaks out in April, and then there's a lot of people who pulled their money in May and June, where again, it's much more however many people are bidding for eyeballs on Facebook is how that works. So you can see it comes down in May and June to its lowest point, and then it kind of pops back up again.
A couple things I'll point out. You mentioned people are having their best months. Some people said, well, it popped, in June. And so I think that's just because there's pent up demand and it'll be a little bit over after that. Well, we've seen a lot of people where that demand has stayed steady, just as a note, since, in the following months after June.
Yeah.
Something that's really important to point out about this graph is that this is only aesthetic practices that we're looking at here. The blue line, though, represents aesthetic practices spending money on Google ads, and they are targeting keywords that are related to aesthetics. They are bidding on people typing in things related to the procedures and surgeries and treatments that they provide. And with other people with their competitors cutting back their budgets, the cost is getting cheaper. But when we say their competitors, we're just talking about other practices in their local markets, because this is all local, this is all aesthetic. What happens with the red line is totally different. You're competing with every other industry out there for these same eyeballs. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, if you're trying to run an ad for a cool sculpting or a non-surgical, something like that, or maybe a surgical on Facebook, there's also an e-commerce company that's, maybe a fashion brand, maybe a jewelry brand, maybe it could be any kind of product, also trying to target, that has a lot of overlap in their targeting with the same people that you're trying to target. So that's why costs for our clients are going up on Facebook. We're only looking at our data, but it's becoming harder for aesthetic practices to acquire at the same cost. There's still a strategy for it, 100%, but they're competing with the rest of the world. So that's a really key thing to note about the difference and why we saw this COVID cross, as we call it, which is the CPA. The cost, when we say CPA, it's the cost per acquisition or cost per lead. That's what we mean. And then the CPC is the cost per click. Actually, we don't show that on here, but the cost per acquisition on Facebook is going higher. And that's a key reason. Many people flocking. And again, many people flocking to Facebook and Instagram to advertise. And again, Facebook and Instagram are not as good at targeting people who are thinking about a surgery as they are targeting people who are thinking about buying a cute top. That's a little bit different. So just wanted to point that out.
All right. So the real conversion, like we mentioned, the real conversion is patients to dollars. So there's a term called ROAS, ROAS, or ROAS, which is return on ad spend. And that's essentially, we look at acquisition, which is how many leads does it take to then convert into an actual patient, which then converts into dollars for you and your practices. Lead quantity is good, but quality is key. So having enough quantity is a good thing, but you also want to make sure that you're not getting, we've seen circumstances where someone's phone's ringing off the hook and it's not good quality leads that are being generated. I'll give you an example. Someone put up some ad where it was talking about how you get a free gift card for something, and it's some sort of a gimmick thing like that. And it's not very clear what it is. And you have people and leads coming in that aren't really someone who's intent on getting a surgery. So that's an important thing for making sure that you have a real conversion that happens. And then, of course, follow-up is an internal cost. So that is a cost it's the duty of the practice and important within the practice to make sure you have a system and a machine where converting an internet lead, it requires follow-up. It requires certain actions in order to actually get that person to come in and convert into a surgery. So there's the point where we end up working with the practice, and we work to make sure that they have things in place. I mean, we're not a consultancy, but we work to a degree. We do consult, but we're not a plastic surgery practice consultant, so to speak. We work with a lot of partners who help to make sure that that internal process is working.
Yeah, and the key thing here to note on that bullet point here, follow up as an internal cost, is that I could have probably worded that better, because the reality is what we really want to say is your follow up cost is part of your acquisition cost in reality. So when you're comparing ad platforms, if you're getting leads that take a lot more follow up, you need, once you get the lead in and someone in your practice is having to chase those leads down, you have to just factor that in to the actual return, the final return on investment on those people that you actually book for surgeries. And the key reason we note that is that we have not in any scenario have I ever seen a situation in which Facebook and Instagram ads didn't require more follow-up than Google. Again, it doesn't mean that there's not a fantastic strategy for them, and they come at a lower cost per lead generally, so it usually evens out. But you have more time internally with your team to follow up and get those leads in the door. And right now we're seeing the last slide with the COVID cross, we're seeing an interesting opportunity to get these higher intent leads that require less follow-up. It doesn't mean they don't need follow-up. They definitely do. But it could be 1 or 2 calls versus we've had with Facebook. Sometimes it's, people, depending on how diligent the practice is, they call it 10 times before they just decide not to call that lead back. And there are many Facebook leads that never answer, or when you reach them, they simply say, I don't even remember filling out this. What are you talking about? Because it was done so passively. And we could go into that more. But right now there's an interesting opportunity to get these higher intent leads that require less follow-up for closer to Facebook costs.
Yeah. Okay, investing in organic. I don't know if you want to take this, Max.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of already touched on this earlier on one of the other slides, Adam, but there, as I talked about in the beginning of this presentation, there are organic strategies and tactics for both platforms, and they just really require a long-term view and a commitment. There's massively effective ways on both of these platforms, and someone could argue, when I talk about organic with Facebook, really would just mean Instagram, and one could argue, okay, and then when I talk about organic with Google, really I mean search engine optimization. So one could argue that one is better than the other, but I would argue that it's extremely personal, and again, it has to do with being an investor. What is your personal approach? Are you going to be the kind of person who's going to wake up every morning and with your selfie stick, and I mean, not really, but you know what I mean, and make a bunch of videos talking to your tribe? And that might not be you. I know a lot of people who say, like, it's just not something I'm going to do. And you have to make that commitment. And then they want to try to outsource their social media. That's very hard to do. It can be done on a limited basis. But if you want to become someone who's really developing your social media to something where it's becoming a major patient acquisition machine, you've got to put out content every day, and you have to really commit to it, and you have to think long term. So that's another reason it's a bit like investment. It's longer term, and you're not going to get that payback right away. On the organic side, as Adam mentioned earlier, on the paid side, meaning paying for ads, there's a shorter term return that is possible. On the Google side with search engine optimization, it is a little easier to outsource. Obviously, the more involved you are, the higher quality it will be, but it is a little easier to have a team that can help you do that. And you might say, I'm more of a writer than I am a YouTuber, and I want to write great articles and content. And if you work with a good team that can advise you, we're seeing if they can sort of advise you, like, this is the sort of search trends we're seeing. Maybe if you could write some content about that from your unique point of view as a plastic surgeon, put it on your site instead of another platform where they would leverage, your knowledge and expertise. That's an awesome way for you to get traffic and invest in your organic strategy using your skill sets and just in line with what your personal style is. So it really is personal. And then also, again, thinking like an investor, diversification is really wise. So when someone says, well, where should I be investing my beans on the organic side of my marketing? Again, just to reiterate, if we're not clear on this, what we call organic is anything you're not having to pay for per click on. So if you're building up your presence on Google, you're building up your presence on Instagram and your audiences without paying for ads, that's all of that activity is organic. And it's important to diversify. People get a little too dependent on one or the other. So, again, going back to that conversation, is one better? It is dependent upon your personal approach, but at the same time, being diversified is wise, so that if all of a sudden you fall out of, Google falls out of love with your content and you're no longer ranking, you don't have such a huge hit. Or, in the case of Instagram, if you follow the guidelines, it's not likely that you're all of a sudden going to get, completely penalized and lose your audience. But increasingly, they're making it harder and harder for you to reach that audience without having to pay. And with anything like this, with social media or any of these digital platforms, we sort of compare it to building a house with your own money on land that somebody else owns. At any point, you can get booted. So you just want to be diversified.
It's worth mentioning that not as a scare tactic, but we've seen it happen where someone has, over the years built up a big YouTube following, or over the years built up, YouTube is, in that sense, no different in that you have subscribers and they have a huge subscription base to it, or Instagram, they have a huge following. And then for whatever reason, the winds change, and, that became, they had a huge dependency on that as a lead source, and they never really invested in other diversified areas like building up their search engine optimization. They ranked for nothing on Google. And then all of a sudden the winds turn, and patients that they used to get, their account suspended or something happens, and boom, they have a major problem on their hands and they have to figure out how to do it. So yeah, much like investing, diversify your portfolio, so to speak, where you kind of have your risk spread around. That's the safest approach.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree with you more, Adam.
All right, so the right tools for the job. This is just sort of a recap of some of these items. So paid, it's well suited for surgeries and high margin procedures. Paid Google in particular, search ads. It can give you immediate return. Often we see around 5-to-1 return on ad spend for our clients on Google, and it gives you higher quality leads. In the case of Facebook, it's well suited for non-surgical. You can do some surgical ads, but as I'm sure you may or may not know, some of the Facebook ad policies can be finicky, and there's certain things that can or can't be approved, and there's certain finesse required to that, which I know our Facebook team has become very familiar with over the years. Anyway, targeted education, awareness. So you're creating general awareness. You're using those ads in order to, sometimes you can use it for just general brand awareness, where you want to bring a certain audience or a certain demographic or geographic targeting aware of the fact that your practice, if you're opening a practice or you have a new office that you're opening, something like that, that has a very good ability to do it, because you're kind of basically putting a billboard up on everyone's phone that you want to target, And then it does have immediate return. Approximate return is 3-to-1 return on ad spend. So it's a little bit different than Facebook in that regard, but it's a very good place, and we've had good success on it, particularly in non-surgical procedures.
You're saying it's a little different than Google, right?
Sorry, different than Google. Yes, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Organic Google, it's well suited for surgery and high margin procedures. Again, organic being long-term search engine optimization, building yourself up so you rank well. It has long-term return. It has maximum return on investment if you're successful. So you invest in this as a long-term thing. Perfect example is we just worked with a practice where they're in a highly, highly, highly competitive market. They were going for ranking for one of the most searched terms in that market. In this case, this is Beverly Hills that I'm talking about. And we got them to rank after months and months and months of working on it and dedicated efforts. We got them to rank number one. And now they're really seeing the return from that result. But we had to make sure
nowhere is the key point. So they had no traffic coming from Google when we first began working with them to number one. So that's a big journey, but you can see the difference in the traffic is just tremendous, and the quality of traffic once you're hitting number one in a market like that. I mean, there's no real way to compare that return to anything else. There's no better vehicle than getting people who are organically coming to your site. People, I think, inherently also like to. There's a little bit more trust when they're not clicking on an ad. I think consumers are becoming more educated on that. So the quality of lead on organic is something else that we see that's higher. It's less fickle. They're more committed to you, is what we've noticed. As just a side note.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. And then for Facebook organic, it's well suited for all categories, meaning you can, I think that point you're referring to all categories of non-surgical versus surgical.
Surgical, non-surgical. Really, if you can build up a great presence there, you can crush it in any category of treatment. But it's just a question of whether you can commit to doing that.
Exactly. So next point requires large time investment. So as Max was just saying, there is a certain X factor that people that we've seen be successful on it, where you have to become a content creator in order to really successfully do that. No agency, no person you're going to be able to hire is going to be able to really, like, you can get a baseline, which is better than nothing for your social. But if you're really going to go hard and build a huge following on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, really, it requires a large time investment, and it requires diligence over a long period of time to build that audience up.
Yeah, but people that have their own teams entirely in-house, which if you can afford it, it's a great idea. You can have your own videographer, you can have your own editor, you can have your own graphic designers doing things for you. But what's funny is that even spending that much money, you still have to put in time because you're the product in that case, or you're the star of the show, and you gotta
personality. Yeah,
you're the personality. So just a point.
But with that being successful, we've seen it generate significant return on investment where, you have 100,000, 200,000 followers or more, and you get regular leads off of that platform when that's happening as you generate your content. And a lot of it's really, I will just say, a lot of the most successful content that we've seen is educational, but then there's also an entertainment element to it. So anyway, that's its whole subject of a whole other conversation, but that's the right tools for the job. So the answer is really, it's both platforms. It's just finding the right recipe for your practice and what's the right mix for your practice. So
again, like investment, we look at things like a mix. Okay, good. What are all the different investment vehicles that we want to mix together to create the right, single outcome? A couple notes I'll make when it comes to the organic social. It's also becoming harder if you're starting now to get to that 100 or 200,000 followers. I'm not saying it can't be done, but just from even now to 3 years ago, the opportunity and the window is different on Instagram. This is the subject of an entirely other talk, but there's new platforms, obviously. TikTok being really the only one I'm referring to. And there's so many people asking, should that be where we go? That's its own talk. And if I look back at early Instagram, I would say, if you want to invest, there was people back then asking that same question, and the answer is clear now. So if you want to invest the time to make sure that you don't miss that wave, go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, mixing other things in so that you're getting return now. So you have again, looking at like investment and a diversification strategy, have some short-term things that are going to get you the earnings and income you need now, while taking some longer-term bets that could pay off big, but don't put all your eggs in the long-term basket and not pay attention to the short-term. So you got to mix it up. One other point I want to make that I think is important. When we talk about Google being well suited for surgery and Facebook paid ads being well suited for non-surgical, you can absolutely advertise non-surgical on Google, and you can absolutely advertise surgical on Facebook, Instagram, but we're just talking about what they're best suited for. And I just want to speak just quickly as to a few reasons why that is. When it comes to Google ads being more expensive, it is harder to get a positive return on procedures that have a lower margin. So there's a lot of competition on Google, and they're for some of these procedures, and you can end up paying Right now it's a little cheaper, but most of the time you can end up paying well over $100 for a lead. And depending on what you're promoting, that can eat up your margin. So it oftentimes doesn't make too much sense. If you're going to do it, it's advised to do, it's best, we would advise you do it on things that have a higher potential for return. Even things like cool sculpting can work because a person might come in. We just had a person who came in got a client off a lead. I just heard this story yesterday, and they came in and did 16 cycles. So sure, the payback is there. But you have to really evaluate which procedures you're going to advertise. And it's okay to do some general too, just like plastic surgery, plastic surgeon near me, med spa, and so forth with Google. And that's always good too. But when we really recommend you target specific procedures and try to go after those ones with high case value, because then you're really being strategic. When it comes to Facebook, the opposite is true. The cost is cheaper, so it's a little easier for you to get those non-surgical leads there at a cost that fits within your margin. But with surgical, there are limitations as to how you can, like Adam said, their ad policies are challenging sometimes and finicky when it comes to surgical. You can run surgical ads. They're generally a little more general, where you're just sort of what I call selling the dream of plastic surgery. We have seen some successful ones for breast campaigns, breast augmentation, and things like that. But it's hard to depend on that because they often get shut down. And even if you can get an ad through, which there are strategies for getting ads through, don't get me wrong, you're asking someone who's just scrolling to stop and go, do I want to get a breast augmentation right now? You know, and that's, if they do fill it out, it's going to be offer based. It's going to be because there was a buy now, an immediacy that was created by get $250 off. There was a recent one I saw with $250 off implants and a syringe of some filler altogether. And that's okay, but you're going to get a certain kind of customer as a result of that, who's bargain shopping. And they did it because there was some immediacy of an offer, and then they forget when you call them. This is what we talk about when I was talking about earlier, where you call that person and they're a Facebook lead and they go, oh, did I fill out? Facebook is auto-completing some of what they fill out for them, depending on the type of ad you're running, which means they're not even necessarily, in some cases, we do this a little bit differently as a way around this problem. But if you're using certain types of ad products that Facebook provides, and in many cases, people are just clicking one button and Facebook is giving you their email. So they just don't remember. They tapped one button. It's not hard to imagine why they just totally forgot. So I just wanted to highlight that you definitely can run surgery on Facebook, and you definitely can run non-surgical on Google, but there's a real reason to the reason we're saying this. It's not just because we're trying to bash Facebook and we love Google or something. We do manage a large amount of ad spend, and most of that is on Google, but there's a reason for it. Lastly, I want to say with the search engine optimization side, it's important to go after surgery because, again, there's a lot of competition. You can think of competition in surgery as, you can think of competition in search engine optimization as how many pieces of content are out there in your market on this topic. So if I know that, so let's just, an easy example is how many pages talking about facelift I'm in Pasadena, California, so I'll just say Facebook in Pasadena. How many bits of content are out there like that versus cool sculpting in Pasadena? There's definitely more. There's an organic filter, which is education and accreditation and so forth, which makes it harder for there to be as many people offering the same service. As some services in the non-surgical world get more commoditized, there's a lot more content out there. It becomes really hard to get you ranking on page one for something like that. It doesn't mean it can't be done. There is a long-term approach, but that's one of the reasons why we say spend, the first goal should be getting your surgical pages to rank, and then you can kind of go after the non-surgical. We've definitely done it, but you have to have a strategic approach where you pick what you're going to get return on in the short term first. And we would say the highest return, it's not by any means easy, but easier, is getting your surgical stuff ranking simply by virtue of there being less competition. That is my long-winded rant that I wanted to give on this, Adam. Sorry. I'm glad I have this down on video now too, because I talk about this a lot with clients, and now I'm going to cut a little clip of that and send it to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's informative. And I think it would help any practice to understand the dynamics at play there.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
Let me move to the next slide here. Take it away, Adam.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a key point that, believe it or not, we haven't covered yet in this. We covered a lot of things. Your website matters. So you can't spend money on ads and invest in this long-term investment of search engine optimization and have a website that is a poor image of who you are and your practice. It also can't, in this day and age, just be sort of okay. You need to have something which is a very strong visual, beautiful website that will help convert that person. Just as much as a number of you invest in making sure you have a beautiful physical practice where when people come in, they're impressed, you want to have your website impress them when they land on it. They're going to want to immediately, like within a second, know, wow, this is very different than the other websites I looked at, or immediately be instilled with the idea of confidence that the beauty of your website or the communication of it and the whole package is reason for them to look further and to read more and to further engage with the content on your site. It is imperative that your website does that. So you can, this is a factor where the conversion rates that we're talking about, you could double your CPA, your cost per acquisition, of getting a person to actually submit a lead form or pick up the phone and call if they land on your website and they're immediately turned off. It's no different than walking down the street and looking at a kind of a rundown building. I'm not saying everyone's website's run down, but if you compare a website that is, or a building that's run down versus a beautiful newly renovated building, you're immediately going to be more attracted to something that looks nice
We
and
talk
is.
about it like your digital storefront. And so when you look at a store, you make a lot of decisions about what do they sell? Do I want to go there? Is that for me? Uh,
Exactly.
do I want to, you make an instant decision. And I think that's the top of this slide says something that I think is super important, which is conversion is visual. I think by this point, we've been doing this long enough that we've proven that. We've taken a lot of the same, all other factors being level and even, and just put a website that is far more impactful in the first moments that a person sees it. And we've seen conversions increase sometimes by double. So one of the biggest lost areas for getting your ad spend to go, one of the most overlooked avenues for stretching your ad spend further and getting your cost per acquisition down is a term that people refer to as conversion rate optimization, or CRO. But it just really means spending time making sure that the people you get there actually convert. And that's best done by having a website that just impresses from the minute someone lands on it. They don't even really think, they just immediately, it establishes legitimacy. And especially like Adam said, you're in an aesthetic industry, you have to represent something that's aesthetic.
Yep, exactly. These are just some examples of some recent sites that we launched. This is Dr. Troiano. She's in West Palm Beach or Palm Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
you can go visit the site and give it a closer look. It's really, our team did an amazing job with this. A lot of really cool animations and layered elements as you scroll down. It's a beautiful site. She has a beautiful brand in general. And really, we were able to bring that to life in a way where people feel a sense of what they're going to feel when they talk to her, when they walk into the practice from the website. We want to create a similar feeling. We want to bring that feeling to your website. And what that also helps is it helps with the next conversion, which is now they have to come in and there's another conversion. They have to now come in and then book. And we find that when people resonate with your site and then your site actually accurately reflects your practice, your conversion rate of booking is higher versus they liked your site, but they come in and they see something different in the practice. Or if they see your site and they go, not for me, fine, that's better. Just, having an angle and having a slant to who you are and what your personality is, put that out there and own it, because it's going to create people who really gravitate towards you. And then when that's a consistent through line through everything you're doing, it cuts out a lot of those problems, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I think I might have skipped one, actually. There we go.
Oh, yeah. This is Dr. Christian Subio in Philadelphia. This is just the top portion of his website, and you can't really see it, but I recommend for anyone watching this, you should go to his site and take a look at it. In this case, he's an artist and an illustrator as well. And so there is an element with his site where we had illustrations and then they turn into actual real images. Really beautiful site. And since we've implemented it, there's been several good things that have happened in relation to conversion and ranking for that site. Aesthetics MD, this is another example of a site we built somewhat recently in the last 6 months or so. This is Dr. Anton in Newport Beach. Beautiful website, again, with some custom animations and some black and white and color elements to it. recommend as well for you to take a look at that site.
And as you dig through them, you'll see that it's more than just design. There's a lot that we're doing with content writing, content optimization, user experience, making it easy for the person to convert, et cetera. But what we're trying to illustrate right here is just that first impression is important. That's what we're trying to illustrate in these exact slides that we're showing you.
Yep. This is Dr. Andrew Smith. He's in Irvine, Orange County area. Again, very capturing photo, unique brand, where at a glance, you immediately know that this person is the real deal. They don't have a website from 10 years ago. It's very attractive, and you immediately want to look in and see, what before and afters they have, what information they have, like who's the doctor, what's his credentials. So this is our effort to draw a user immediately in when they land on it.
Also had great results since launch.
Yeah, also for that one as well. Okay, so in summary, each ad platform has its place and its use. So Google and Facebook each have their own unique use, and they have their place and how they use it. It's sort of, we look at it kind of like you have to know how to play the piano, or you have to know kind of like which tool to use at the right time. So there is no, anyone that's preaching that one thing is like, don't do that, do this. The answer is that you have to have the right approach that's customized for your practice, for where you're at in the kind of the arc of your career, beginning, middle, end, growth, scaling, looking to sell your practice. We've dealt with all circumstances, and you have to tailor your marketing around whatever that is and your advertising. You need to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of each, and that is key. And we went into great length in this, but if anyone has further questions, we're happy to talk to anyone and answer them in greater length in relation to Google, Facebook, organic, paid, anything related to that. The right mix is personal to your practice and your goals. So in our case, one of the first things we do with any of the practices that we talk to, any of the doctors that we talk to that come to us for consultation, or they want to kind of know what our approach would be if we took over their marketing, that's one of the first things we do. Is we want to know where they're at in their career. We want to know, what are they trying to achieve? It's different for every practice. Some of them want to go hard on social media and become that social media personality. Some of them want to fix an immediate solution, and they want to run some ads right now because they want to fill up more X type of surgery. Some of them want to build a med spa. It really depends, and we customize our approach to whatever that is. And then just to recap on that point, Google is higher intent, and right now costs are down. So right now there is an opportunity specifically with Google search ads that no matter who you're with for marketing, if you're with us or if you're with another company, I recommend strongly that you explore that and see if you can optimize some of that opportunity that's there right now to get you more patients and more revenue. Google requires higher margin procedures for positive ROI. So again, along that line, mostly we recommend surgical procedures on Google because the higher margin procedures are going to give you that higher return on investment because it costs a little bit more, but it's worth it. And there's a couple of white papers which Max wrote for us, which you guys, anyone watching this, we encourage you to download and give them a read. There's some interesting information in there. We're also going to be issuing some other new ones relatively soon, but those are some that you can look at now as a resource.
Yeah, and also we'll send along this presentation actually for anyone who wants to get their hands on it, finds it interesting. And so you can get all three of these things if you just go to influxmarketing.com/ASAPs.
There you go. All right, and who we are, we're Influx Marketing. So we are, like Max mentioned in the beginning, we've been around for about 6 years. We are based in Pasadena, and we also have offices in Salt Lake City, Park City, Utah. And this says the new standard in medical marketing, but as Max mentioned, we are very focused on the aesthetic industry. The majority of our clients are in that space. We understand the space very well. And Max, myself, and the individuals who started this company, we have even longer experience in that space that we would love to help. We love helping practices realize what they're trying to get. And that's kind of what drives us every day. Is we like the industry. We see the tremendous potential in the growth in the industry. And there's a lot of really fantastic surgeons out there that in some cases are just coming out and just starting a practice, or in some cases, they've kind of maybe had a few different experiences with their marketing that maybe haven't been great, or it's kind of okay, but or in some cases they haven't done any marketing at all. And we want to help anyone who's in that position to really expand their practice and grow at the rate that they want to grow, whether it's just maintaining things, growing really aggressively, or any of that. And that's essentially who we are. We're a team of about 40 individuals that have design skill and content writing skill. And we do the full gamut of everything that a digital and creative marketing agency would do, focused specifically on the medical aesthetic marketing area.
Yeah, and if anyone would like for us to just give them an opinion and analysis of their site, of their current marketing, digital presence, happy to do that. And here's a little information on how you would reach out to us, but basically the internets. You can go to influxmarketing.com.
Indeed.
I think that's our presentation for today. Thank you to all the Aesthetic Society members for joining us. Thank you so much for putting on this incredible event and letting us be a part of it. And we will see y'all next time.
See you later.
Take care now.